This leads to him crying as he runs across rooftops and flies over the city like he's in an Evanescence music video. For all of the problems I have with the latest crop of superhero movies that have disgraced our screens over the last 8 years or so, the new Spider-Man movies have been a cut above that. And I think that's because those movies, and specifically this one, Brand New Day, feel more like comic book movies than superhero movies. Superhero movies have largely devolved into soulless, mass-produced affairs, more focused on their conveyor belt of cameos and getting you back for the next, barely related movie whose real payoff is more than 5 years out. Whereas comic book movies, like Spider-Man Brand New Day, put more of an emphasis on the character, their journey, their relationships, and the great responsibility that comes with their great power. Though there are still some aspects of the movie that are more of a commercial for the next movies to come, Brand New Day feels more self-contained than all of the other MCU slop shoveled out since Endgame. It wants to tell the story of Peter Parker, his lost friends and MJ and Ned, and how Peter learns to be more than just Spider-Man. It spends its time focusing in on Peter's feelings of isolation, everything he's lost, and the pain that's brought. It's not just about the next team-up with increasingly less relevant heroes hurtling toward an inevitable showdown with the next obscure villain scheduled for sometime near the end of the decade. In that sense, Brand New Day is refreshing. And overall, I think it's a decent movie. But, and admittedly, it's not a fair comparison, it's not No Way Home. That movie, having been the culmination of a trilogy, had much more weight to it. And, apparently, Brand New Day is the beginning of a new Spider trilogy, with the larger story beats obviously being carried over. So comparing this one to the last one is like comparing apples and oranges. Which, you can compare fruit, as Little Dicky said, but comparing different fruit is ultimately fruitless. Outside of Peter Parker's personal problems, the movie also feels kinda low stakes, the villains end up being a hodgepodge of nothing burgers, and the movie definitely could have been clearer in getting its messaging across. But we'll talk more about all that after we get in a recap of the film. So if your spidey senses are tingling, that's because there are spoilers heading this way. We get underway with Spider-Man swinging into action as the hero the city needs. He chases an armored personnel character that's marauding through the streets as it crashes into a building, revealing a little old grandma inside. See, this is why old people should have their licenses revoked. But the woman is being mind-controlled by an unseen entity, which then jumps into other nearby people, taunting Spider-Man as it tries to flee. It tries to jump into Spider-Man as well, but somehow he's able to resist it. But the entity escapes. Then he visits a naked Black Widow in a jacuzzi. One of the perks of the job, I guess. She tells him about something important, known only as VMAX. This movie's MacGuffin that sounds like the latest in tampon technology. In search of more information on VMAX, Spidey heads to the Department of Damage Control, a government department that tries to control the damage that soups can do. And the department has come under a wave of attacks recently. Here he meets Bill Metzger, the head honcho of this agency, played by Tremel Tillman, who put aside his office-bound character of Seth Milchick from Severance for an office-bound character in the MCU. Metzger tells Spider-Man that he's the only person who can sense the mind control entity, defend against it, and therefore the only one who can defeat it. Then Peter Parker sees his old friend Ned at the Quickie Mart and weirdly follows him to a party. Kind of a creepy move, which seems more like something we'd see out of Spider-Man 3 Peter Parker. At the party, Peter stumbles across Ned's Spider-Man-themed goon wall, which is awkward. But things would get worse, as Peter gets cucked hard watching MJ make out with her new boyfriend. This leads to him crying as he runs across rooftops and flies over the city like he's in an Evanescence music video. All while flashbacks of his relationship with MJ play. Suddenly, something's going wrong with his powers, and he collapses. He wakes up in a spider coma, trapped in a web cocoon, which he falls out of. It turns out he's becoming more spider than man, and he has heightened senses and can produce webbing organically. So now he's splooging webs out of his wrists like a real Spider-Man. But it just kinda poots out, as he seems to have a problem with premature webulation. Elsewhere, Scorpion is leading another attack on a damage control building in search of the VMAX. Spidey swoops in and gets his rump roasted, but then his mutation takes over and he beats the stinger off Scorpion. But it turns out he was under mind control too. Looking for a way to suppress this mutation, Peter seeks out Bruce Banner, whose advice leads to Peter developing an inhibitor chip that can keep him under control. While testing the chip out, the mind control entity taunts Spider-Man, saying it's going after MJ, so Spider-Man has to beat it to her. Like he needs to beat it to MJ. He needs to run off and beat it to MJ. Like he needs to shoot his webs off and beat it to MJ. Toward MJ. You know what I'm trying to say. He gets to her first and spirits her away to safety. But she has this deep feeling that she knew Spider-Man before. The two kiss and she appears to remember everything they had, but it turns out the mind control got to her first, and it's messing with Peter's head. Then his anger and mutation takes over, as he holds MJ off the side of the building by her neck, but eventually the entity leaves her. Then, the young woman behind the mind control drives right past Spider-Man, looking right at him, letting him see her face in a genius move that then allows him to run a background check on her. Genius because it'll just let the plot continue forward, that is. Spider-Man then decides to hide MJ with his good friend, Frank Castle, the Punisher. Because he thought it would be a good idea to leave Zendaya with a single guy whose nickname is the Punisher. Spidey runs a background check on the girl as the movie reveals its big twist. Her name is Jean Grey, and she's a telepath. After bonding with MJ a little bit, Spidey slings off to go after Jean, who's broken into another damage control facility, where she's punching in SQL and accessing databases. So cool. She's looking for VMAX, because it's a heavy flow day and she needs the latest in tamp tech. And Metzger and the rest of the employees are holed up in a panic room as something tries to beat down the doors. Spidey finds Jean, but the Hulk shows up, under her control, and Spider-Man has to fight off the green monster. The Punisher comes in and helps a little bit, knocking Jean out of the Hulk's head. But the Punisher eventually falls under Jean's control, as the Hulk calms down into Bruce Banner, then enrages back into the Hulk. Hulk is about to crush Peter Parker's puny peanut noggin, but Peter's able to calm him down. You know, I feel like the whole Hulk running rampant and never able to control himself and someone having to calm him down with soothing words thing has kinda run its course by now, right? It's getting a little old. Anyway, Jean breaks into the secure room looking for someone, but Spider-Man slaps an inhibitor chip onto her, leaving her powerless. As she succumbs to a tranquilizer dart, she utters the name Sarah, then she's taken into custody. Spidey returns to MJ to celebrate, but she's found the letter he wrote for her in the last movie, explaining their past relationship. He says, "I love you," and she says, "I don't know you," and then he has to take her home like a Spider-Man Uber. But she does invite him up for Ned, but he heard head, so he rushes upstairs. It's not what he thought he was rushing toward, but he's at least able to hang out with her and Ned again like the old days. Peter's able to deduce that Metzger actually lied to him about something he experienced when under Jean's control. So he's the real bad guy, just like Severance. We get a flashback where we learn Sarah was Jean's sister, another telepath who the Department of Damage Control kidnapped, never to be heard from again. In their custody now, Jean gets experimented on as they try to find a way to bottle her powers, this time for evil. And it's during these tests that we learn VMAX is not the future of gush gutter technology. It's just the flimsy sticker on the air vent in this room where Sarah was killed. The last thing she saw and telepathically screamed out to Jean. Realizing this, Jean goes Super Saiyan, blasting out a pulse wave of mind control which grips everyone in the city, except Spider-Man. And the Punisher for some reason. When Spider-Man shows up to help her, she controls these red ninjas that hold him off. At some juncture in the movie that I must have missed, it's explained that Peter's mutations are the result of him losing who he is as Peter Parker and becoming just Spider-Man. And it's during this battle that Peter Parker realizes he needs to be both, gaining control over and power from his mutations. He smacks the ninjas all the way back to Nagasaki and confronts Jean, who's holding Metzger hostage. Peter invites Jean into his mind, a place she couldn't previously go. And there she gets a therapy session from Aunt May, and Jean and Peter trauma bond. This makes her not a bad guy anymore, but it gets interrupted by a bullet the Punisher fired to break Jean's hold on the city, one that finds its way into Peter's back. He ends up in the hospital, where Jean has been using her powers to keep him alive. Peter leaves the hospital as himself, where he sees Spider-Man's adoring fans outside. And with them, and Jean, and the Punisher, he realizes he's not as alone as he thought. And at some point off-screen, Metzger got away somehow. Later, at the Quickie Mart, Peter talks to his old best friend Ned and hits him with their secret handshake. And after Ned explains that his hands are sticky from the donut and not from his Spider-Man goon wall, Ned suddenly remembers Peter and their friendship from before, and the credits roll. Until the very end, where the post-credit scene shows the Spider-Man tracker app picking up a Spider-Man, maybe not this Spider-Man, somewhere in outer space. The end. Brand New Day is a decent movie, but I wouldn't say it does anything spectacular. Everything to do with Peter and his lost friends and trying to get them back, that character work, those relationships, that was all good. But I'd say that's where the film was at its best. I've heard a few people say that this movie has the best action of the Tom Holland Spider-Mans, but none of it really stood out to me. Maybe the fight with the Red Ninjas, just because of how stylized it was, but everything else was decent, but not incredible. Now let's talk about the villains in this movie, because that was the weakest part of Brand New Day for me. First off, you have the Red Ninjas, and you have Scorpion, and they were only in this thing to sell the trailers. The fight with the Red Ninjas looked cool, and Scorpion is back and he looks menacing, but in the actual movie, they're hardly relevant at all. But I get why they did this. They needed to keep Jean Grey's reveal a secret, and then keep the fact that she actually wasn't really a bad guy a secret too. So, long story short, the trailers don't give you a great idea of the movie's actual story. But in the end, the real bad guy was, dun dun dun, Bill Metzger from accounting. From what I can gather about the comic book version of Metzger, he emerges as a radical, anti-mutant activist who stirs up the people against them. But they gave Tremel Tillman nothing to do in this movie. I'll be damned if he had more than 20 or 30 lines. Even after his sinister designs came to light, it's not like he grew more animated or maniacal. It was like nothing had changed. And then he somehow escapes off-screen? I don't know, it seemed wasteful, and it kind of leaves you with this feeling that they didn't resolve anything in that category. And in that same vein, the movie seemed pretty low stakes, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. We're here to focus on Peter's story, after all, and that's one of the things the movie did right. But in the end, the only real danger to society at large was Jean. And all she needed was an Inception Dreamland therapy session from Peter's dead aunt to stop being dangerous. So, this isn't exactly a world-saving escapade. Also, you might be wondering what one of the original X-Men has to do with Spider-Man. And the answer is nothing. They drew some parallels between the characters through their mutations and their past traumas. But Jean Grey is only here as an introduction before they throw her in later MCU films. Lastly, the emotional beats of this movie are just not in the same ballpark as those of No Way Home. As I said, it's not a fair comparison, but if you're going into Brand New Day expecting the same level of emotional weight to the story, you're gonna be disappointed. The movie leaned into a lot of flashbacks to deliver those emotional moments, which felt a little cheap. Like, here's some flashbacks. Feel something, why don't ya? Also, the story doesn't feel very tight, and it felt like they couldn't really settle on an overall message or theme that it wanted to focus on. They ended up going with Peter Parker losing himself to Spider-Man, that he's been neglecting Peter Parker for so long that he's becoming only the Spider. And there was more about him finding out he's not alone out there after he lost his love and his best friend. But the movie certainly could have been more definitive in outlining all of this. It wasn't until someone asks Peter if he's going to be Spider-Man or Peter Parker and he said both, where I'm like, oh, that's what they were going for? It's too understated throughout the movie, to the point where the actual payoff of the message is the first place that it even became clear. But don't let these points outweigh the positives of this movie. The characters and their relationships are where this one does its best work, and those aspects outweigh the shortcomings. And at least this movie isn't trying to be anything it's not, and it's mostly able to keep the crippling soullessness of the other MCU films at arm's length. Somehow, the day before this movie releases, Rotten Tomatoes already has thousands of audience reviews. And they've got the movie at a 98%, which even for a movie that I generally enjoyed is insane. But that's just the binary nature of how their rating system works. It just means 98% of viewers thought the movie was at least above average. And that's kind of where I would put it. I'd give it a 6.5. And if you are really into these characters or this series, you'll probably put it closer to a 7.5. So if you have any interest in the movie, I'm giving it a great watch label, and I think it's worth your time. But I want to hear from you. Were you looking forward to this movie? Were you expecting an emotional letdown from No Way Home to this one? Are you also kinda tired of the Hulk? Let us know in the comments. And remember to like the video if you liked it, and subscribe to HateWatchers for reviews of other current shows and movies. Thank you for finally getting some representation in Hollywood with a hero dealing with premature webulation with me today, and I'll catch you on the next one.